Imagine standing at the edge of a vast, uncharted wilderness. Before you, countless paths stretch into the unknown, each one filled with potential, yet shrouded in uncertainty. You hesitate, knowing that the choices you make now will shape your journey, whether you find yourself lost in the wilderness or discover treasures beyond your wildest dreams. Now, imagine if you had a map, a way to see through the fog and navigate life's challenges with precision and confidence. What if you could unlock the secrets of your own mind, sharpening your thoughts into tools as powerful as any sword? Welcome to the beginning of a journey that will do just that. In this audiobook, you won't just be a passive listener. You'll become an explorer of your own intellect, guided by the timeless wisdom of Stoic philosophy. You'll learn how to develop critical thinking skills that will transform the way you approach every decision, every problem, and every opportunity that comes your way. You'll uncover the hidden biases that have been steering your choices without you even realizing it, and you'll gain the tools to take control of your own destiny. But this isn't just about learning techniques or mastering strategies. This is about becoming the hero of your own story. You'll follow the path of Lycurgus, a young man who, like many of us, began with uncertainty and doubt. Through his journey, you'll see how the principles of Stoicism can turn confusion into clarity, hesitation into action, and obstacles into opportunities for growth. As you listen, you'll discover how to break down complex problems, analyze information with razor-sharp focus, and make decisions that are not only wise, but also aligned with your deepest values. You'll emerge from this journey with a mind that is not only resilient, but also empowered, ready to face whatever challenges lie ahead. Are you ready to embark on this adventure? The path to mastering your mind begins here. Chapter 1. The Call to Adventure. Lycurgus had always been a man of potential, but like so many others, he found himself trapped in a cycle of indecision and doubt. Every choice seemed burdened with uncertainty, every problem too tangled to unravel. He watched as others around him seemed to glide through life, making decisions with ease and confidence, while he struggled to find his way. One day, while sitting by the city's ancient fountain, Lycurgus was approached by a figure whose presence exuded calm and wisdom. This man, an elder known throughout the city as a sage, sat beside him and observed the young man's furrowed brow. "You seem troubled," the sage said, his voice as steady as the flow of the fountain's waters. "I am," Lycurgus admitted. "I feel like I'm adrift in a sea of choices, unable to find solid ground. How do others seem to navigate life's challenges so effortlessly?" The sage smiled gently. "What you see as effortless is the result of something that can be learned, a skill, not a gift. It's called critical thinking, and it is the compass that can guide you through the uncertainties of life." Lycurgus listened intently as the sage explained that critical thinking is not simply about knowing facts or making quick decisions. It is a disciplined approach to understanding the world and making judgments that are not swayed by emotions or unfounded beliefs. Critical thinking involves questioning assumptions, analyzing situations from multiple angles, and using reason as a guide. "But is this something one can truly learn?" Lycurgus asked, his curiosity piqued. "Indeed," the sage replied. "Critical thinking is not a talent reserved for a few. It is a skill that anyone can develop with practice. It is like a muscle that grows stronger with use." As they continued to talk, the sage revealed that the journey to mastering critical thinking was not an easy one, but it was transformative. Lycurgus would need to examine his own thoughts, recognize the biases that clouded his judgment, and learn to approach problems with a clear and open mind. This journey would require patience, dedication, and above all, the courage to question even his most deeply held beliefs. For Lycurgus, this conversation was a turning point. The sage had offered him not just advice, but a challenge, a call to adventure, to step into the unknown, to seek out the truth hidden beneath the surface of every decision and problem. This was the beginning of a journey that would not only change the way he thought, but also reshape his entire approach to life. As you embark on this journey alongside Lycurgus, you too will learn to master the art of critical thinking. You will discover how to question the assumptions that have been guiding your choices, how to see through the distractions of everyday life, and how to make decisions with the clarity and confidence that comes from true understanding. This first step is about recognizing that critical thinking is the key to unlocking your potential. It's about understanding that, like Lycurgus, you have the power to navigate life's challenges, not with hesitation and doubt, but with a sense of purpose and control. The journey will be challenging, but the rewards are immeasurable. Are you ready to begin? Chapter 2: Mapping the Mind. With the sage's words echoing in his mind, Lycurgus set out on the first leg of his journey. He had accepted the challenge, but he knew that before he could navigate the complexities of the world, he needed to understand the terrain of his own mind. It was like setting out into a dense forest. Without a map, one could easily become lost, unable to distinguish between paths that lead to clearings and those that lead to dead ends. As Lycurgus walked, he began to observe his thoughts more closely. He noticed how his mind would often jump to conclusions, how it clung to familiar ideas, even when new information suggested he should reconsider. It became clear to him that his mind was full of patterns, some helpful, but many that led him astray. The sage had spoken of this too, referring to it as the inner landscape. Just as a traveler must understand the lay of the land to find their way, so too must one become familiar with the patterns of their own thinking. This was the first step in mastering critical thinking: self-awareness. Lycurgus found a quiet spot beneath a large tree where he could sit and reflect. He began to practice what the sage had called mindfulness. With eyes closed, he let his thoughts flow freely, observing them without judgment. He noticed how certain thoughts triggered emotions, how worries about the future caused anxiety, or how recalling past mistakes led to feelings of regret. But instead of getting caught up in these emotions, he simply acknowledged them and let them pass, like leaves floating down a stream. This practice of mindfulness helped Lycurgus to start mapping his mind. He began to see recurring themes in his thoughts, patterns that he had never noticed before. He realized that he often assumed the worst in uncertain situations, a habit that made him hesitant and fearful. He also recognized that he tended to rely on first impressions, rarely questioning whether those initial judgments were accurate. To capture these insights, Lycurgus started keeping a journal. Each day, he would write down his thoughts, emotions, and reactions to various situations. Over time, this record revealed deeper insights into his decision-making processes and the biases that influenced him. He saw, for example, how a single bad experience could cloud his judgment in similar situations, leading him to make decisions based on fear rather than reason. As Lycurgus continued this practice, he became increasingly aware of how his mind worked. He learned to recognize when he was jumping to conclusions or letting his emotions dictate his actions. This self-awareness was empowering. It gave him the ability to pause, reflect, and choose his responses more deliberately. But this was just the beginning. Lycurgus knew that understanding his thought patterns was only the first step. He had to do more than just recognize his biases. He had to overcome them. And for that, he needed to delve deeper into the workings of his mind, to confront the hidden influences that shaped his thinking. As you follow in Lycurgus's footsteps, you too can begin to map your own mind. Start by practicing mindfulness, paying attention to your thoughts and emotions without judgment. Keep a journal to document your reflections, and over time, you'll start to see the patterns that guide your decisions. By becoming aware of these patterns, you can begin to take control of your thoughts, making choices that are not driven by fear or habit, but by reason and clarity. This chapter is about laying the foundation for critical thinking by understanding the inner workings of your mind. Like Lycurgus, you'll discover that self-awareness is the key to navigating the complexities of life. Once you can see the landscape of your mind clearly, you'll be better equipped to chart a course through any challenge you face. Chapter 3. The Shield of Reason. As Lycurgus journeyed deeper into his inner landscape, he began to realize that understanding his thought patterns was only part of the battle. He needed something more, something to protect him from the traps his mind could set, something to help him see through the fog of uncertainty and confusion. It was during these reflections that he remembered the sage's words about the power of reason. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the path, Lycurgus encountered a traveler who carried a large, ornate shield. The shield was unlike any Lycurgus had seen before, gleaming with an inner light that seemed to cut through the gathering darkness. The traveler, noticing Lycurgus's curiosity, paused and spoke. "This is the shield of reason," the traveler explained. "It is a tool, not of war, but of wisdom. It protects the mind from falsehoods and guides the bearer to sound judgments. With it, you can defend yourself against the errors in thinking that so often lead us astray." Intrigued, Lycurgus asked the traveler to teach him how to wield this shield. The traveler agreed and began to explain the fundamentals of logical reasoning. "At its core," the traveler said, "logical reasoning is about understanding the relationship between different ideas. It's about identifying the premises, the starting points of an argument, and following them to their logical conclusions." To illustrate this, the traveler gave a simple example. All men are mortal. Socrates is a man. Therefore, Socrates is mortal. This, the traveler explained, was a basic form of deductive reasoning. If the premises are true, the conclusion must also be true. Lycurgus quickly grasped the concept, but soon realized that reasoning was not always so straightforward. The traveler warned him of the many pitfalls, logical fallacies, that could lead even the most careful thinker into error. Some arguments, though they might appear sound on the surface, were riddled with these fallacies. The traveler described some of the most common fallacies. There was the ad hominem fallacy, where one attacks the person making an argument rather than the argument itself. Then there was the false dichotomy, which presents only two options when, in reality, more exist. The slippery slope fallacy was another danger, where one assumes that a small step will inevitably lead to a chain of related events without sufficient evidence. Armed with this knowledge, Lycurgus began to see the world differently. He noticed how often these fallacies appeared in everyday conversations, in the rhetoric of leaders, and even in his own thinking. The shield of reason helped him to recognize these errors, allowing him to question arguments and identify when something didn't quite add up. But the traveler wasn't done teaching. Logic alone isn't enough, the traveler cautioned. You must also seek evidence to support your conclusions. Reason without evidence is like a shield without a bearer, useless in the face of real challenges. Lycurgus took this advice to heart. He began to look for evidence in everything he encountered, weighing it carefully before forming conclusions. He learned to ask critical questions. Is the evidence relevant? Is it reliable? Does it truly support the conclusion being drawn? With the shield of reason in hand, Lycurgus felt a newfound confidence in his ability to think clearly and make sound decisions. He realized that by applying logical reasoning and seeking evidence, he could cut through the confusion that once held him back. As you continue your journey, you too can learn to wield the shield of reason. By mastering the fundamentals of logical reasoning, you can protect yourself from the fallacies that cloud judgment and lead to poor decisions. Practice recognizing these fallacies in your daily life and always seek evidence to support your conclusions. With reason as your shield, you'll be better equipped to navigate the complexities of life, making decisions that are grounded in truth and wisdom. This chapter marks a significant step in your journey toward mastering critical thinking. With the shield of reason, you can defend against the errors that once misled you and move forward with clarity and confidence, just as Lycurgus did. Chapter 4. Facing the Shadows. With the shield of reason now firmly in his grasp, Lycurgus continued his journey, confident in his growing ability to navigate the world of ideas. Yet, as he ventured further into the unknown, he soon found himself entering a dark and foreboding cave. The air inside was thick with uncertainty, and as he stepped deeper into the darkness, he realized he could no longer rely solely on the light of reason to guide him. Strange shapes loomed in the shadows, and whispers echoed off the walls, distorting his sense of reality. It was then that Lycurgus remembered the sage's warning about the hidden dangers within the mind, dangers that could lead even the most rational thinker astray. These were the cognitive biases, the shadows that lurked in the corners of our thoughts, subtly influencing our judgments and decisions without our awareness. To continue his journey, Lycurgus knew he would have to confront these shadows head-on. As Lycurgus ventured deeper into the cave, the shadows began to take shape, each one representing a different bias that had misled him in the past. The first shadow he encountered was the most familiar: confirmation bias. This shadow showed him how, time and again, he had sought out information that confirmed his pre-existing beliefs while ignoring or dismissing anything that challenged them. It was as if he had been walking with blinders on, seeing only what he wanted to see, and reinforcing his own misconceptions. Determined to overcome this bias, Lycurgus resolved to actively seek out information that contradicted his beliefs. He understood that to grow and learn, he needed to challenge his own assumptions, even when it was uncomfortable. He would no longer be content with easy answers. He would dig deeper, question more thoroughly, and embrace the full complexity of the world around him. Further along the cave's twisting path, Lycurgus encountered another shadow, the Troita anchoring effect. This shadow revealed how his mind had often latched onto the first piece of information it encountered, allowing it to disproportionately influence his subsequent judgments. Whether it was the initial price in a negotiation or the first impression of a person, this bias had anchored his thinking, preventing him from seeing the broader picture. To counter this bias, Lycurgus learned to pause and reflect before making decisions. He would no longer be swayed by the first piece of information he encountered, but would instead seek out additional data and perspectives. He knew that by taking this extra time, he could free himself from the anchor's grip and make more balanced, informed decisions. As Lycurgus pressed on, he came face to face with yet another shadow, the availability heuristic. This shadow showed him how his mind had been biased by the ease with which certain memories came to mind. Because these memories were vivid or recent, they had disproportionately influenced his perception of how likely or important certain events were. For instance, after hearing about a plane crash, he had irrationally feared flying, despite knowing that driving was statistically more dangerous. To overcome this bias, Lycurgus vowed to base his judgments on solid evidence rather than on the ease with which certain memories or examples came to mind. He would remind himself to consider the actual probabilities and risks, rather than allowing emotionally charged or easily recalled events to cloud his judgment. As Lycurgus emerged from the cave, he felt a profound sense of clarity. By confronting these biases, confirmation bias, anchoring effect, and availability heuristic, he had taken a crucial step in mastering his mind. He now understood that these shadows were not malevolent forces, but simply parts of his thinking that needed to be recognized and managed. As you journey with Lycurgus, you too can begin to identify and overcome the cognitive biases that influence your decisions. Start by being aware of how confirmation bias, anchoring, and the availability heuristic play out in your own life. When you find yourself clinging to a belief, anchoring on a first impression, or overestimating the importance of a recent event, pause and question these tendencies. By shining the light of awareness on these shadows, you can see them for what they are, natural, but ultimately conquerable aspects of the human mind. This chapter is about facing the hidden influences that shape our thinking. By recognizing and managing these cognitive biases, you, like Lycurgus, can navigate the complexities of life with greater clarity and wisdom. Chapter 5. Untangling the Knot. Having emerged from the cave, Lycurgus found himself standing before a massive, tangled knot, a labyrinth of twisted threads that seemed impossible to unravel. This knot represented the complex problems he would inevitably face on his journey. The knot was daunting, each strand woven tightly into the others, with no clear beginning or end. Yet, Lycurgus knew that to continue his journey, he would need to learn the art of problem-solving, to methodically untangle even the most intricate challenges. Lycurgus remembered the sage's advice. To tackle any problem effectively, he first needed to break it down into smaller, more manageable parts. The knot before him, though complex, could be unraveled if he focused on one thread at a time. This approach, the sage had explained, was known as problem decomposition, a fundamental technique in solving even the most daunting issues. Taking a deep breath, Lycurgus began to examine the knot, identifying individual strands and slowly teasing them apart. As he worked, he realized that many of the problems he had faced in life were like this knot, seemingly insurmountable when viewed as a whole, but much more manageable when broken down into smaller tasks. By focusing on one aspect of the problem at a time, he found that he could make steady progress even when the overall challenge appeared overwhelming. Once he had identified the core components of the knot, Lycurgus knew the next step was to gather information. He needed to understand the nature of the materials, the forces that had created the knot, and the best techniques for loosening the threads. This reminded him of the importance of thorough information gathering in problem solving. Too often, he had rushed into solutions without fully understanding the problem, leading to ineffective or incomplete results. Lycurgus decided to cast a wide net, seeking knowledge from various sources. He consulted with others who had faced similar challenges, learning from their experiences and insights. He studied the structure of the knot, looking for patterns that might reveal its weak points. As he gathered more information, the problem that once seemed impossible began to yield to his efforts. Armed with this understanding, Lycurgus began to generate potential solutions. This stage of problem solving required creativity and an open mind. He knew that the first idea wasn't always the best, so he allowed himself to brainstorm freely, suspending judgment and considering even the most unconventional approaches. He remembered the sage's words. Sometimes the most innovative solutions come from ideas that initially seem outlandish. Lycurgus tried several different techniques, carefully evaluating the results of each. He compared the pros and cons of various approaches, considering their feasibility, potential outcomes, and any unintended consequences. He realized that this process of evaluating solutions was critical. Jumping to conclusions or choosing the first workable option often led to missed opportunities or unforeseen problems. Finally, after much effort and experimentation, Lycurgus found a solution that allowed him to untangle the knot. But he knew that solving the problem wasn't the end of the journey. It was also important to implement the solution effectively and monitor its results. He carefully followed through with his plan, making adjustments as needed and ensuring that the problem was fully resolved. Through this experience, Lycurgus learned that problem solving is as much an art as it is a science. It requires patience, creativity, and a methodical approach. He also realized the importance of being flexible. Sometimes the path to a solution isn't straightforward, and being open to changing tactics can make all the difference. As you follow Lycurgus in this chapter, consider how you approach problems in your own life. Do you often feel overwhelmed by their complexity? Do you rush to solve them without fully understanding the situation? By adopting the techniques Lycurgus used, problem decomposition, thorough information gathering, creative brainstorming, and careful evaluation, you can begin to untangle the knots in your own life. This chapter is about empowering you to tackle challenges with confidence and clarity. By breaking problems down, seeking the right information, and approaching solutions with an open mind, you can solve even the most complex issues with wisdom and patience. Just as Lycurgus unraveled the knot, you too can learn to navigate the intricate problems that life presents, one thread at a time. Chapter 6. The Lens of Truth. With the knot finally unraveled and the path ahead clearer, Lycurgus continued his journey, feeling more confident in his ability to tackle the challenges that lay before him. Yet, despite his newfound skills in problem solving, He knew that the world was still filled with illusions and half-truths, capable of leading even the most diligent thinker astray. To navigate this complex world, Lycurgus needed a tool that would allow him to see things as they truly were, a tool that could cut through deception and reveal the truth. As he walked through a dense forest, pondering these thoughts, Lycurgus encountered an old merchant selling an array of unusual items. Among them was a small, intricately designed lens that caught Lycurgus's eye. The merchant noticed his interest and offered the lens to him, saying, "This is the lens of truth. It allows its bearer to examine anything with clarity, revealing what is hidden beneath the surface." Intrigued, Lycurgus accepted the lens and held it up to his eye. As he looked through it, the world around him shifted slightly. Details that had once been obscure now came into sharp focus. Arguments that had seemed persuasive on the surface were suddenly exposed for their flaws and inconsistencies. It was as if he could now see the very structure of reality, how things fit together and where they fell apart. The lens of truth, Lycurgus realized, was a metaphor for the ability to analyze information and arguments critically. It represented the skill of breaking down complex ideas into their basic components and evaluating them with a clear, discerning mind. This was the next essential step in mastering critical thinking. As he continued his journey, Lycurgus began to use the lens to examine every argument and piece of information he encountered. He learned to dissect arguments into three key components: claims, premises, and conclusions. A claim, he understood, was an assertion about what is true or what should be done. The premises were the reasons or evidence provided to support that claim, and the conclusion was the final point that the argument was trying to prove. Lycurgus practiced this analysis constantly. For example, when someone claimed that a particular action was the best course of action, he would first identify the premises supporting that claim. Were these premises based on reliable evidence? Were they logically connected to the conclusion? If the premises were weak or irrelevant, the conclusion could not stand. This process helped Lycurgus see beyond the surface of arguments and understand their true strength, or lack thereof. As Lycurgus honed his analytical skills, he also became adept at recognizing common patterns of reasoning, both valid and invalid. He could now identify when an argument followed a sound logical structure, such as the syllogism he had learned earlier. All humans are mortal. Socrates is a human, therefore Socrates is mortal. When premises were true and the logic was sound, the conclusion was compelling. However, Lycurgus also became vigilant against logical fallacies, which were like cracks in the structure of an argument. He saw how easily one could fall into the trap of a slippery slope fallacy, where a single action was said to lead inevitably to a chain of catastrophic events without any real evidence. He recognized the danger of confusing correlation with causation, where two events happening together were mistakenly believed to have a direct cause and effect relationship. Through the lens of truth, Lycurgus also learned to be wary of hidden assumptions, unstated premises that were often taken for granted, but could significantly alter the outcome of an argument. For instance, when someone argued that lowering taxes would stimulate economic growth, Lycurgus would use the lens to uncover the assumption that lower taxes always lead to growth, a premise that required further scrutiny. With each step of his journey, Lycurgus became more adept at separating fact from fiction, truth from deception. He understood that critical thinking required not just the recognition of good reasoning, but also the exposure of bad reasoning. The lens of truth allowed him to navigate the world with a sharper mind, discerning the difference between solid evidence and mere rhetoric. As you continue alongside Lycurgus, you too can learn to wield the lens of truth. Practice breaking down arguments into their basic components, claims, premises, and conclusions. Scrutinize the evidence and the logic behind each argument, and be on the lookout for logical fallacies and hidden assumptions. By honing these skills, you'll be able to see through the noise of misleading information and make decisions based on clear, well-reasoned judgments. This chapter emphasizes the importance of clarity and precision in critical thinking. Just as Lycurgus used the lens of truth to see the world more clearly, you too can learn to analyze and evaluate information with greater accuracy. With these tools, you will be well equipped to cut through the complexities of life and uncover the truth, no matter how deeply it is buried. Chapter 7. The Council of Sages. With the lens of truth, now part of his toolkit, Lycurgus continued on his journey, his mind sharper and more discerning than ever before. He had learned to break down arguments, recognize biases, and see through illusions. But as he traveled further, he encountered situations where even his best reasoning skills were not enough. He found himself at a crossroads, faced with decisions that were influenced by more than just logic, decisions that required him to consider perspectives and experiences beyond his own. One evening, as dusk settled over the landscape, Lycurgus arrived at a secluded temple nestled among ancient trees. Inside, he found a gathering of wise elders, each one representing a different philosophy, culture, or field of knowledge. This was the Council of Sages, a group renowned for their diverse perspectives and deep understanding of the world. Recognizing the opportunity before him, Lycurgus humbly asked to join their discussions. The sages welcomed Lycurgus and invited him to sit with them. As they began to speak, he quickly realized that each sage had a unique way of viewing the world. One spoke of justice and fairness, another of practicality and efficiency, while yet another emphasized compassion and empathy. Their perspectives were varied, sometimes conflicting, but Lycurgus noticed that their differences did not lead to discord. Instead, the sages valued and learned from each other's viewpoints, understanding that true wisdom often lies at the intersection of diverse ideas. Lycurgus listened intently, learning the importance of engaging with diverse perspectives. He understood that no single viewpoint could fully capture the complexity of a situation. By considering multiple perspectives, he could gain a more nuanced understanding and make more informed decisions. The sages showed him that even when they disagreed, their debates were not about winning or losing, but about reaching a deeper truth. The first lesson Lycurgus learned from the council was the value of active listening. The sages practiced this with great skill, listening not just to the words of others, but also seeking to understand the underlying experiences and emotions that shape those words. Lycurgus realized that active listening required more than just hearing. It involved setting aside one's own preconceptions and truly being present in the conversation. By doing so, he could better understand where others were coming from and why they held certain views. Next, the sages taught Lycurgus the art of empathy. They explained that empathy was not about agreeing with others, but about seeing the world through their eyes. It was about understanding the human experiences that informed their perspectives. Empathy allowed the sages to connect on a deeper level, to build bridges even when their views diverged. Lycurgus began to see how empathy could enrich his own understanding and help him navigate conflicts with wisdom and compassion. One of the most powerful techniques Lycurgus learned from the sages was steel manning, the practice of presenting the strongest version of an opposing argument before critiquing it. Unlike the common tactic of straw manning, where one attacks a weak or exaggerated version of an opponent's argument, steel manning required Lycurgus to fully understand and articulate the best possible case for the other side. This approach not only made his own argument stronger, but also fostered respect and mutual understanding in discussions. As Lycurgus participated in the council's debates, he realized that engaging with diverse perspectives did not mean abandoning his own values or beliefs. Instead, it meant expanding his thinking, challenging his assumptions, and arriving at more thoughtful and well-reasoned positions. He learned that the sages often used a technique called the devil's advocate, where one member would deliberately argue against the prevailing view to test its strength and uncover any flaws. This practice helped Lycurgus to refine his own ideas and to see issues from multiple angles. When it came time for Lycurgus to leave the temple and continue his journey, the sages imparted one final piece of wisdom. In every decision you make, consider not just the logic and evidence, but also the broader impact on others. True wisdom comes from integrating multiple viewpoints and understanding the ripple effects of your choices. As you walk with Lycurgus in this chapter, consider how you engage with the perspectives of others in your own life. Do you listen actively, or are you quick to dismiss views that differ from your own? Do you seek to understand the experiences that shape others' beliefs, or do you only focus on your own perspective? By practicing active listening, empathy, and steel manning, you can broaden your understanding and make decisions that are more informed and compassionate. This chapter is about the power of diversity in thought. Just as Lycurgus learned from the Council of Sages, you too can gain wisdom by engaging with diverse perspectives and integrating them into your decision-making process. By doing so, you will not only enhance your critical thinking skills, but also deepen your understanding of the world and the people in it. Chapter 8. Choosing the Path. As Lycurgus departed from the Council of Sages, he felt more prepared than ever to face the world. He had learned to engage with diverse perspectives, listen actively, and consider arguments from every angle. Yet, despite all his knowledge and newfound skills, Lycurgus knew that the ultimate challenge was yet to come. He would soon need to make decisions that would determine the course of his life. The road ahead was fraught with uncertainty, and he would need to choose his path wisely. As he continued his journey, Lycurgus found himself standing at a literal crossroads in the wilderness. Before him, several paths stretched out in different directions, each disappearing into the misty distance. The landscape around him was silent, and the weight of the decision pressed heavily on his mind. Each path seemed to promise something different. Some appeared smooth and straightforward, while others were winding and rugged. But which was the right one to take? Lycurgus remembered the sage's teaching. Effective decision-making is not a single moment of choice, but a process, one that begins with a clear understanding of the decision at hand. He knew he had to start by framing the problem correctly. What was his ultimate goal? What did he hope to achieve by choosing one path over another? The sage had warned him that many poor decisions stem from a failure to properly define the problem or to consider all the relevant factors. He sat down at the crossroads, taking time to reflect on his options. The first step, he realized, was to gather as much relevant information as possible. He examined each path closely, noting the terrain, the direction it led, and any signs that might hint at what lay ahead. But Lycurgus also knew that not all information was visible. He needed to consider what he couldn't see, the potential risks and rewards of each choice, the long-term consequences, and how each decision aligned with his values. With the information gathered, Lycurgus began to evaluate his options. He knew this was where his critical thinking skills would be put to the test. He thought back to the techniques he had learned, the importance of weighing both the short-term and long-term implications, the need to balance logic with intuition, and the danger of being swayed by emotions or biases. Lycurgus used a mental tool the sages had taught him, the decision matrix. He mentally listed his options and the criteria that were most important for making the right choice. He then carefully considered how each path measured up against these criteria. This process helped him to see more clearly, to compare his choices objectively rather than being overwhelmed by the complexity of the decision. Yet Lycurgus also remembered that while logic was crucial, intuition had its place in decision-making. The sages had taught him that intuition was often the result of subconscious pattern recognition, shaped by past experiences. He took a moment to listen to his gut feelings, allowing them to inform his decision, but not dominate it. He balanced this intuition with the evidence he had gathered, knowing that neither should be used in isolation. As he weighed his options, Lycurgus confronted the uncertainty that still lingered. No matter how much information he had or how carefully he analyzed his choices, there were always unknowns, variables beyond his control. The sages had taught him a strategy for this too: scenario planning. Lycurgus imagined different possible futures for each path. What might happen if he chose one over the other? How he would react if things didn't go as planned? And what alternative actions he could take if faced with unexpected challenges? Finally, Lycurgus recognized the importance of avoiding common decision-making pitfalls. He was wary of analysis paralysis, the tendency to overthink and delay making a choice out of fear of making the wrong one. The sages had emphasized that in many cases, a timely decision was better than no decision at all. He reminded himself that decisions were not always final. They could be adjusted as new information emerged. He also remembered the dangers of groupthink, where the desire for consensus can lead to poor decisions. Though he was alone in this moment, Lycurgus thought back to his time with the Council of Sages and how they had encouraged dissenting opinions to ensure that all options were thoroughly considered. He mentally played the role of devil's advocate, challenging his preferred option to see if it held up under scrutiny. After hours of careful consideration, Lycurgus finally stood up, ready to choose his path. He knew that no path was without risks, but he also understood that true wisdom came not from avoiding all risks, but from making decisions that aligned with his values, goals, and the best information available. Lycurgus chose the path that, though not the easiest, seemed the most aligned with his purpose. As he began to walk, he felt a sense of resolve and clarity. He knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, He had made his decision thoughtfully and with intention. He was prepared to face uncertainty with courage and adaptability, just as the sages had taught him. As you stand at your own crossroads, consider how you approach decision-making in your life. Do you take the time to frame the problem correctly? Do you gather and evaluate information thoroughly? Do you balance logic with intuition and manage uncertainty with scenario planning? By adopting these strategies, you can make decisions that are not only well-reasoned, but also aligned with your deepest values and goals. This chapter is about empowering you to make decisions with confidence and wisdom. Just as Lycurgus learned to choose his path thoughtfully, you too can develop the skills to navigate life's most complex choices. By embracing the process of decision-making and avoiding common pitfalls, you will be better equipped to face the challenges ahead and to walk your chosen path with purpose and clarity. Chapter 9. Weathering the Storm. With his chosen path beneath his feet, Lycurgus felt a newfound sense of purpose. The road ahead, though challenging, was one he had selected with care and thought. But as he journeyed deeper into the wilderness, the sky began to darken, and a fierce storm rolled in. The winds howled, and rain lashed down, turning the path into a treacherous mire. This was no ordinary storm. It was a test of his endurance, resilience, and inner strength. Lycurgus had prepared for this moment. The sages had taught him that life's greatest challenges often come not in the form of intellectual puzzles, but as trials of the spirit. To navigate these storms, one needed more than just critical thinking skills. One needed mental resilience, the ability to withstand adversity, adapt to change, and emerge stronger on the other side. As the storm raged around him, Lycurgus remembered the foundation of mental resilience, understanding and managing one's emotions. He knew that fear and anxiety were natural responses to such a crisis, but he also knew that allowing these emotions to take control would lead to rash decisions or paralysis. Instead, he focused on cultivating emotional intelligence, the ability to recognize, understand, and manage his emotions effectively. Lycurgus took a deep breath, grounding himself in the present moment. He practiced mindfulness, a technique the sages had taught him. Despite the chaos around him, he concentrated on his breathing, acknowledging the fear and tension within him, but not allowing them to dictate his actions. He observed his emotions like the storm itself, powerful but temporary. By maintaining this calm awareness, he could think clearly and respond to the situation with a level head. As the storm intensified, Lycurgus faced several setbacks. Branches fell across his path, and the mud threatened to pull him under. But rather than seeing these obstacles as insurmountable, he remembered the teachings on the growth mindset. This mindset, the sages had explained, was the belief that abilities and intelligence could be developed through effort, learning, and persistence. Challenges were not threats to his self-image, but opportunities to grow stronger and wiser. Embracing this mindset, Lycurgus saw each setback as a lesson. When a branch blocked his way, he found a way around it, learning to navigate the obstacles rather than becoming frustrated by them. When the mud slowed his progress, he adjusted his pace, conserving his energy for the long journey ahead. Every difficulty was a chance to adapt, to refine his approach, and to build his resilience. But the storm was relentless, and Lycurgus knew he couldn't rely on sheer willpower alone. He remembered the sage's advice to reframe the situation. Instead of seeing the storm As a trial meant to break him, he began to view it as a necessary part of his journey, a challenge that would ultimately make him stronger. By changing his perspective, he found a source of inner strength that helped him endure the hardship with a sense of purpose. As the hours passed, the storm showed no sign of abating. Lycurgus grew weary, but he was determined not to give up. He realized that part of resilience was knowing when to rest and when to push forward. He found shelter under a large tree, where he could take a brief respite from the worst of the storm. Here, he reflected on his journey so far, drawing strength from the knowledge that he had faced and overcome many challenges before. Lycurgus also remembered the importance of maintaining hope and optimism, even in the darkest moments. The sages had taught him that resilience was not about denying reality, but about finding the strength to keep going, no matter how difficult the circumstances. He allowed himself to envision the moment when the storm would finally pass, when the skies would clear, and he would continue on his journey, stronger and more determined than ever. Eventually, the storm began to lose its fury. The winds calmed, and the rain lessened to a gentle patter. Lycurgus emerged from his shelter, weary but unbroken. The landscape around him had changed. The storm had reshaped the path, washing away some obstacles while creating new ones. But Lycurgus stood tall, knowing that he had weathered the storm not by avoiding it, but by facing it head-on. As you accompany Lycurgus in this chapter, consider how you handle the storms in your own life. When faced with adversity, do you allow fear and frustration to take control, or do you cultivate emotional intelligence and resilience? Do you see challenges as threats or as opportunities for growth? By developing a growth mindset, practicing mindfulness, and reframing difficult situations, you can build the mental resilience needed to navigate life's most daunting trials. This chapter is about the strength of the human spirit. Just as Lycurgus learned to weather the storm, you too can cultivate the resilience needed to face life's challenges. By embracing adversity as a chance to grow, you will not only survive the storms of life, but emerge from them stronger, wiser, and ready to continue your journey with renewed purpose and determination. Conclusion: the hero's return. The storm had passed, leaving the air fresh and the sky clear. Lycurgus stood on the path, looking out over the landscape that stretched before him. It had been a long and arduous journey, one that had tested his mind, his will, and his very spirit. Yet, he had emerged stronger, wiser, and more confident in his ability to navigate the world. The path ahead was still uncertain, but Lycurgus no longer feared it. He had learned to trust in his skills, in his reason, and in the resilience he had built along the way. As he made his way back toward the city, Lycurgus reflected on all that he had learned. He thought of the moment when his journey began, when the sage had first spoken to him about the power of critical thinking. Back then, he had been filled with doubt and confusion, unsure of how to make the decisions that would shape his life. Now, he understood that the journey was never just about finding answers. It was about developing the ability to think clearly, to question assumptions, and to adapt to whatever challenges life presented. Each chapter of his journey had brought new insights. He had learned to map the terrain of his mind, recognizing his biases and thought patterns. He had mastered the shield of reason, protecting himself from logical fallacies and weak arguments. He had confronted the shadows of cognitive biases, shining a light on the hidden influences that shaped his decisions. He had untangled the complex knots of problems, breaking them down into manageable parts and solving them with creativity and perseverance. He had used the lens of truth to see the world clearly, analyzing information and arguments with precision. He had engaged with diverse perspectives, learning from the wisdom of others and integrating their insights into his own thinking. He had chosen his path with care, balancing logic with intuition and managing uncertainty with courage. And finally, he had weathered the storm, building the mental resilience needed to face life's greatest challenges. As he walked through the gates of the city, Lycurgus knew that his journey was far from over. The lessons he had learned would continue to guide him, helping him to navigate the complexities of life with clarity and confidence. He had become the hero of his own story, not because he had all the answers, but because he had learned how to ask the right questions, how to think critically, and how to grow stronger with each challenge. For you, the listener, this journey mirrors your own. Like Lycurgus, you have the power to master your mind and to navigate the complexities of life with wisdom and resilience. The tools and techniques you've learned in this audiobook are not just abstract concepts. They are practical skills that you can apply in your daily life, helping you to make better decisions, solve problems more effectively, and approach challenges with confidence. As you move forward, remember that critical thinking is not a destination, but a lifelong journey. It is a skill that grows stronger with practice, a mindset that deepens with experience. You may face obstacles and setbacks, but with the knowledge and tools you've gained, you can meet them head-on, just as Lycurgus did. Reflect on the principles of Stoic philosophy that have guided this journey: wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance. These virtues are not just ideals to aspire to. They are the foundation of a life well lived, a life guided by reason and resilience. Your journey, like that of Lycurgus, is one of continual growth and self-improvement. By applying what you've learned, you can become the hero of your own story, navigating life's challenges with clarity, confidence, and a deep sense of purpose. As you close this chapter and step back into the world, take with you the lessons of this journey. Use them to guide your thoughts, your decisions, and your actions. And remember, no matter where the path leads, you have the power to navigate it with wisdom and resilience. The journey continues, and with it, your growth and understanding.